Welcome to AFROPULSE Stories, where modern African tales come alive. Don't just watch, be part of the journey. Hit like, tap subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Now lean in, today's story begins. The late evening sun dipped low, painting the city streets in hues of amber and fading gold. Cars sped past, their horns blaring, as pedestrians hurried along the sidewalks with bags of groceries, office files, and the rhythm of normal life. But for Amara, there was nothing normal anymore. She sat at the corner of an abandoned bus stop, her back pressed against the peeling concrete wall. Her once bright Ankara dress was torn at the seams, her slippers worn so thin they could barely cling to her feet. One hand rested protectively over her swollen belly, the other cupped out timidly for alms. Few looked at her, even fewer stopped. It hadn't always been like this. Amara was once a woman of dreams. She had a job as a seamstress, a small but loyal customer base, and a man she loved with all her heart. But the day she told him about the pregnancy, everything changed. His promises turned to accusations, his warmth to cruelty. And then, one morning, he simply vanished, leaving her to carry the shame, the hunger, and the child all alone. A small group of schoolboys passed, laughing carelessly. One threw a crumpled note into her lap, more out of mockery than compassion. Amara sighed and looked away. Her pride screamed at her to stand, to walk away, to hold on to dignity. But hunger pressed harder. Pride couldn't feed her unborn child. The rumble of an engine drew her eyes upward. A sleek black SUV slowed at the traffic light just ahead. Its polished surface reflected the glow of the street lamps, and its presence commanded attention. The driver, dressed in a neat suit, tapped impatiently at the steering wheel. But it wasn't him who caught Amara's gaze. From the back seat, a man lowered the tinted window. His eyes, sharp, observant, and strangely restless, fell on her. For a fleeting moment, their worlds collided. He, a man of wealth, stepping out of a gala where crystal chandeliers glittered and laughter flowed like wine. She, a woman of dust and despair, seated on cold cement, clutching her belly like a fragile shield. Amara quickly looked away, heat rising in her cheeks. Men in cars sometimes looked, but rarely with kindness. She braced herself for insult, for pity, or worse, indifference. But the man's gaze lingered. He noticed the weariness in her eyes, the stubborn tilt of her chin, the way her hand cradled her belly as if shielding the child from the cruelty of the world. Something stirred in him, something unfamiliar. The light turned green. The driver tapped the accelerator, but the man in the back seat spoke, his voice firm yet calm. "Stop here." The SUV rolled to a halt beside the bus stop. Doors opened. Shoes clicked against the pavement. Amara shrank into herself, fear flashing across her face. Why was a man of such presence walking toward her? For the first time in weeks, Amara's heart beat not just with survival, but with uncertainty, perhaps even hope. And in that moment, the story that would change both their lives began. The city's nightlife shimmered like a jewel. Neon signs blinked, laughter spilled from upscale bars, and the aroma of roasted suya drifted faintly on the breeze. Inside a sleek black SUV, David reclined against the leather seat, his bow tie loosened after hours of mingling at the gala. To the world, he was the picture of success, an accomplished businessman, wealthy beyond measure, a man who had everything. But inside, David carried a hollowness he could never confess. His mansion was vast yet empty, his successes praised yet fleeting, and every night ended the same, with silence echoing in marble halls. He had learned to live with it, though it gnawed at him in quiet moments. The car rolled smoothly through the city streets. His driver, Connell, hummed softly to the faint sound of the radio, while David stared absently out the tinted window. The gala had been like all the others. Champagne, shallow laughter, and conversations steeped in ambition but lacking soul. Then the SUV slowed at a red light near a rundown bus stop. It was there, in that place most people's eyes never lingered, that David noticed her. A young woman sat slumped against the cracked concrete wall, her dress torn, her face weary, her hand protectively cradling the swell of her belly. She didn't look up as the cars roared past, indifferent to her presence. One hand was stretched out weakly, palm open, as if begging the world to notice she was still alive. David's gaze fixed on her, and something unexpected pierced him. It wasn't just pity. He had seen beggars before, handed out money before, but this was different. There was a stubborn grace in the way she held herself, even in brokenness. The way her hand shielded her belly spoke of courage and determination, of a mother's love burning brighter than her hunger. "Sir." Connell's voice cut through his thoughts. The light had turned green. David didn't respond immediately. He was still staring at her, his mind strangely unsettled. "Sir," Connell repeated, this time more curious than cautious. David blinked, then spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Stop here." Connell hesitated, glancing back. "Here, sir? It's not safe." "I said stop." The SUV rolled to a halt by the curb. David lowered the tinted window, and for the first time, their eyes met. The woman looked up briefly, startled, her wide, dark eyes filled with suspicion and fear. She looked away almost instantly, as though expecting insult or rejection. But David continued to watch her, his heart unexpectedly restless. He saw the faint tremor of her hand, the quiet dignity in her bowed head. He wondered about her story, how a woman so young, so fragile yet so strong, had ended up here, invisible to the world. Without another word, David opened the door. The sound startled her, and she shrank back instinctively. He stepped out, adjusting his suit jacket, his polished shoes meeting the dusty roadside. The glow of the SUV's headlights illuminated her, a fragile figure caught between despair and resilience. For reasons he could not yet name, David knew this encounter would change everything. The evening air carried the faint scent of roasted corn from a nearby roadside vendor, but Amara's stomach clenched with hunger she could not satisfy. She kept her eyes low as the tall, well-dressed man approached, his polished shoes stopping just inches from her worn slippers. "Are you hungry?" His voice was deep, smooth, yet touched with sincerity. Amara flinched, unsure if he was mocking her. She had heard pity before, and it always came wrapped in cruelty. She tightened her arm around her belly and shook her head, whispering, "I'm fine." But her trembling voice betrayed her. The man crouched down, leveling his eyes with hers. His gaze was steady, not of pity, but of genuine concern. "Don't lie to me. You haven't eaten, have you?" Amara's throat tightened. The truth was written all over her frail body. Before she could respond, he turned to his driver. "Go get her food. And water." Moments later, a steaming pack of jollof rice and grilled chicken was placed before her, along with a cold bottle of water. Amara hesitated, torn between pride and hunger, then finally surrendered. She ate slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks, not just from relief, but from the unfamiliar feeling of being seen. The man watched silently, hands folded behind his back. When she finished, he spoke again. "My name is David." She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, her voice low. "Amara." That single exchange of names sparked something between them, an unspoken connection that neither could explain. David offered her a hand. "Come with me. You shouldn't be out here tonight." Amara recoiled instinctively. Men had offered her help before, but the price was always her dignity. She shook her head firmly. Sensing her fear, David softened his tone. "I'm not like them. I'm only offering you safety, you and your child." The sincerity in his eyes disarmed her. Against every cautious instinct, she placed her trembling hand in his. The SUV's plush interior enveloped her. Soft leather, faint perfume, and air conditioning. It felt like stepping into another world. Amara sat rigidly, clutching her belly, afraid to touch anything. When they arrived at his mansion, her breath caught. The towering gates, manicured lawns, and sprawling lights were like something out of a dream. Servants opened the doors, their eyes widening at the sight of her. "Sir, is everything all right?" one asked, unable to hide the disbelief. "She's my guest," David said firmly. Whispers followed them inside. Amara's cheeks burned. Every polished floor, glittering chandelier, and luxurious sofa reminded her of where she did not belong. David noticed her unease. "You're safe here, Amara. No one will harm you." But safety and belonging were two different things. And as she curled up in the guest room that night, staring at silk curtains she dared not touch, she wondered why fate had thrown her into the world of a man like David. The morning sun poured through the wide windows of the mansion, waking Amara to a softness she had almost forgotten, a bed that embraced instead of concrete that bruised. She sat at the edge, staring at the neatly folded clothes a maid had left. The whispers of last night still echoed in her ears. Why would Sir bring a beggar here? At breakfast, she hesitated to sit at the long polished table, but David gestured to the seat opposite him. She picked at the food shyly, glancing at him only when he wasn't looking. David studied her quietly. She wasn't just a beggar. She carried herself with a grace that poverty had failed to crush. Her eyes, though weary, held strength. The way she shielded her belly, as though already mothering her unborn child, stirred something deep in him. "Do you trust me?" he asked suddenly. Amara looked up, startled. "I don't know you." "Fair enough," he said with a faint smile. "But I want you to know I mean no harm." Silence stretched between them, yet it wasn't empty. There was something in the way he looked at her, something unspoken but powerful. For the first time since her life had crumbled, Amara felt a flicker of safety, a fragile bond forming between two people from worlds that never should have touched. And though neither admitted it, both sensed that fate had only just begun weaving their story. The mansion's great hall glowed under crystal chandeliers as David entertained a few business associates one evening. Laughter and the clink of glasses filled the air until Amara appeared at the staircase, hesitant, dressed in a borrowed gown from the maid's quarters. Whispers erupted instantly. "Who is she? Why is she here?" David rose, his eyes fixed on her. He had been wrestling with his thoughts for days. Why he couldn't stop thinking about her. Why her strength and quiet dignity had unsettled his heart. And now, standing before his colleagues and critics, the answer came with startling clarity. He walked to her, his hand steady, his gaze unwavering. "Amara," his voice carried across the hall. "You don't belong to the streets. You belong somewhere safe with me. Marry me." The room fell into stunned silence. A glass slipped from someone's hand, shattering against the marble floor. Amara froze. Her chest tightened. She could barely process his words. Marriage? To him? The murmurs around them grew louder, some mocking, others incredulous. Her lips parted, but no words came. The world blurred, and all she could hear was the thundering of her own heart. By the next morning, the city's gossip columns were ablaze. Millionaire proposes to pregnant beggar. Headlines screamed from tabloids, social media buzzed with speculation, and paparazzi camped outside David's gates. Inside the mansion, chaos brewed. David's business partner stormed in, furious. "David, have you lost your mind? This will ruin your reputation. Investors will pull out." Even his own mother, elegant and cold, arrived in a swirl of expensive perfume. A beggar, David? A woman carrying another man's child? Is this your idea of legacy? Amara, overhearing, felt like a shadow creeping in where she didn't belong. She wanted to vanish, to spare him the ridicule. Yet, when she looked at David, he remained unshaken. "I don't care what the world thinks," he said firmly. "This is my choice." But deep inside, Amara wondered if she was truly a choice or simply a rebellion against his world. That night, Amara sat by the window of her guest room, staring at the distant city lights. Memories of her past tormented her. The man who abandoned her, the scornful stares, the countless nights of hunger. What if David grows tired of me too? What if I'm just his charity project? Her hand caressed her swollen belly as tears slid down her cheeks. She whispered to her unborn child, "Maybe we don't belong here. Maybe this is too good to be true." When David knocked softly on the door, she quickly wiped her tears. He stepped in, his eyes searching hers. "You don't trust me," he said quietly. "I don't even trust life anymore," she admitted. David moved closer, his voice low but steady. "Then trust this. Whatever happens, I won't abandon you." For the first time, Amara saw not a millionaire, not a rescuer, but a man who carried loneliness of his own. And though her doubts remained, A fragile thread of hope stitched itself into her heart. The following week, David hosted a press conference, cameras flashing, microphones thrust toward him. The city expected him to deny the rumors, to call it a misunderstanding. Instead, he looked straight into the sea of flashing lights. Yes, I proposed to Amara. Yes, she is carrying a child. No, it does not change how I feel. She will be my wife. The crowd erupted, some with admiration, others with disbelief. Reporters shouted questions, but David walked off, leaving headlines scrambling to catch up. At home, Amara confronted him. Why would you do this? They'll tear you apart for me. David's gaze softened. Because I see more in you than the world ever will. And I'd rather stand with you in fire than live without you in peace. Amara's breath caught. For once, his conviction burned stronger than her fears. And though uncertainty loomed, she began to wonder if this impossible story might be real. The engagement was official. Rings had not yet been exchanged. But David's bold declaration left no room for retreat. Inside the mansion, however, the atmosphere grew heavier by the day. Servants continued to whisper when they thought Amara couldn't hear. She's just a street girl. This won't last. Amara tried to walk with her head high, but the weight of judgment pressed her shoulders low. Sometimes she caught her reflection in the grand mirrors, her worn skin, tired eyes, and protruding belly against the backdrop of marble floors and golden chandeliers. She looked like a stain on perfection. David noticed her unease. One evening, he found her sitting alone in the garden, the night air cool against her skin. Do you regret saying yes? He asked softly. Amara shook her head slowly. I don't regret hope. I just don't know if I fit in your world. David took her hand. Then let me build a world where you do. It was a fragile beginning, their bond still tender, but for the first time Amara felt the possibility that maybe, just maybe, love could bloom where shame once ruled. The day of the wedding dawned with a sky painted in brilliant gold and crimson. Outside the cathedral, crowds gathered, some curious, some mocking, others genuinely eager to witness history. Inside, Amara trembled in a borrowed white gown. It wasn't stitched with diamonds like society brides wore, but it carried something more precious. Dignity restored. Whispers followed her down the aisle. She was a beggar. She's carrying another man's child. But above the noise, she fixed her eyes on David, standing at the altar with unwavering pride. The vows were simple but heavy with meaning. When David slid the ring onto her finger, the world seemed to pause. He didn't just promise her love. He promised her redemption. Outside, cameras flashed furiously. Some headlines hailed it as the love story of the century. Others mocked it as a fool's fairy tale. But as David kissed her gently beneath the vaulted ceiling, Amara felt the mocking voices fade. For once, she wasn't the woman abandoned on the roadside. She was a bride, a wife, and perhaps, finally, a woman chosen. Marriage brought new battles. Moving fully into David's world was like stepping into a kingdom where she was both queen and outcast. She tried to adjust, learning to dine with silver cutlery instead of her hands, wearing gowns tailored by famous designers, walking in heels that blistered her feet. Yet in quiet moments, she longed for the simplicity of roasted corn by the roadside, or the laughter of children chasing tires down dusty streets. David noticed her discomfort. One evening, he invited her to a charity event, thinking it might ease her into society. Instead, it became another battlefield. Women in silk gowns sneered openly. Men whispered behind champagne glasses. David could have had anyone, and he chose her, one voice hissed. Amara held her head high, but her heart trembled. Later that night, she asked him quietly, "Do you regret it?" David cupped her face gently. "I regret nothing, but I regret that the world cannot see what I see." In that moment, Amara realized her greatest challenge wasn't luxury or status. It was surviving the venom of a society that refused to forget where she came from. The weeks after the wedding brought uneasy calm. Amara was slowly finding her footing in David's world, but just as she began to breathe, a storm reappeared. Her husband's past. Sophia. She arrived unannounced at David's office, dressed in a crimson dress that clung like fire. her perfume filling the air before her words did. "David," she purred. "So this is the life you've chosen? A beggar for a wife." David stiffened. "She's my wife, Sophia. Show her respect." Sophia laughed bitterly. "Respect? Do you think society respect her? Or you? They're laughing at you, David. And when they're done laughing, they'll walk away from your business too." That night, Sophia's shadow lingered in Amara's mind. She had overheard a fragment of their heated exchange. Though David reassured her, the seed of fear grew. Sophia was beautiful, wealthy, and belonged in his world in ways Amara never could. At dinner, Amara asked quietly, "If she fights for you, will I lose?" David reached across the table, his eyes steady. "You don't lose what's already yours." But Amara wasn't so sure. The ex's return threatened not just her marriage, but her fragile self-belief. If Sophia's return was fire, David's mother was ice. From the moment Amara entered the mansion, his mother's disapproval dripped like poison. Elegant, dignified, and proud, she could not fathom her son tying himself to a woman of the streets. She devised subtle tests. At family dinners, she quizzed Amara on etiquette she had never learned. At social gatherings, she left her stranded among society women who mocked her in whispers. One afternoon, she summoned Amara to her private sitting room. On the table lay a contract. "Sign this," she said coldly. "It is a check. Enough money to raise your child in comfort. Leave David, and you'll never worry about hunger again." Amara's breath caught. The pen trembled in her hand, not out of temptation, but out of anger. She pushed the contract back. "I did not marry David for money. I married him because he saw me when no one else did. If you think I can be bought, you don't know me at all." For the first time, David's mother faltered. Amara's defiance chipped at her icy wall, though pride kept her face hard. That evening, David found Amara shaken. She confessed what had happened. He held her tight and whispered, "You don't need to prove yourself to her. You've already proven yourself to me." The night came suddenly. Amara woke to sharp pains tearing through her belly. The contractions gripped her like waves, stealing her breath. Panic surged. David rushed to her side, his usually composed face etched with fear. "Hold on, Amara. I'm here. I won't leave you." The drive to the hospital was a blur of sirens and prayers. Amara clenched his hand until their fingers ached, her screams filling the car. Hours stretched like years. Nurses bustled, doctors gave commands, but through it all, David never let go of her hand. Finally, a cry pierced the room, the cry of life. A tiny, fragile baby lay swaddled in the nurse's arms. Amara's tears flowed freely as they placed the child against her chest. David looked at the baby, then at Amara. His voice broke. "He's not my blood, but he's my son, and I will love him as if he were my own." Amara's heart swelled. In that moment, she knew no ex, no gossip, no disapproving mother could shake the truth. They were a family now. The baby's cries softened as he nestled in Amara's arms, tiny fingers clutching her gown. Exhausted yet glowing, she kissed the child's forehead and whispered, "You'll never be alone like I was." David stood beside her, staring at the child with awe. For a long moment, he said nothing. His chest rose and fell, as though holding back emotions he wasn't used to showing. Finally, he reached out, his hands trembling. "May I?" he asked softly. Amara hesitated. This was not his child by blood. But when she placed the baby into his arms, something magical happened. David's face softened, his eyes glistened, and the mighty businessman seemed suddenly fragile. The baby whimpered, then settled against his chest. David held him close, whispering words Amara barely caught. "You are mine now. My son. My legacy. My joy." Amara's tears spilled freely. In that moment, she knew. David wasn't rescuing her. He was choosing her. Choosing them. And the bond sealed in that hospital room would last a lifetime. News of the child's birth swept across the city. Some gossiped cruelly. "He's raising another man's child." Others admired him. He chose love over pride. One evening, David took Amara and the baby to a gala. Cameras flashed, eyes followed them. Whispers swirled like smoke. Amara's heart pounded. She feared the humiliation would return. But David didn't hide her. He didn't keep her in the shadows. He stood tall, his arm around her waist, the baby cradled proudly. When a reporter sneered, "Mr. David, how does it feel raising a child that isn't yours?" the room tensed. David smiled calmly. "It feels like being blessed," he replied. "Because fatherhood isn't just blood, it's love. And love is what binds us." The room fell silent. For the first time, the whispers turned into reluctant respect. Some clapped, others bowed their heads. Amara looked at him with tears in her eyes. In that single moment, he had silenced the world for her. Sophia was not finished. Watching from the sidelines, bitterness consumed her. The man who once adored her now looked at another woman with a devotion she had never earned. And so, she played her final card. She hired a photographer, arranging a secret meeting. One evening, as David left his office, Sophia slipped into his car. A hidden camera flashed, images of her leaning close, whispering, making it look like intimacy. The next morning, the tabloids exploded. Millionaire caught cheating. Ex back in the picture. Amara's heart shattered when she saw the photos. She locked herself in their room, clutching her baby, tears staining her gown. When David returned, frantic, she thrust the newspaper at him. "Is this what I am to you? A joke?" David grabbed her shoulders, desperation in his eyes. "No. She set me up. You have to believe me." Her silence cut deeper than any insult. But then, Sophia made her mistake. In her arrogance, she boasted to a journalist about her plan. The recording leaked, exposing her trap. David showed Amara the proof. Relief flooded her, guilt mixing with love. "I should have trusted you," she whispered. David kissed her forehead. "The world can throw anything at us, Amara, but only we can choose whether to break or to stand." And in that choice, they stood stronger than ever. Amara had faced Sophia's venom and society's ridicule, but the coldest shadow remained David's mother. Though she never raised her voice, her disapproval was louder than any insult. Every glance, every pause, every silence said, "You are not enough." One afternoon, Amara walked through the mansion gardens, rocking her baby to sleep. She whispered lullabies from her childhood, soft and unpolished, yet filled with love. David's mother watched from a distance. She had come to summon her son, but what she saw rooted her in place. Amara's voice carried warmth that softened even the hardest stone. She pressed her cheek against the baby's head and whispered, "You will grow strong, my child. No wealth, no poverty, no cruelty will define you. Only love." Something cracked in the older woman's chest. Memories of raising David, of cradling him when no one believed in her young motherhood, returned. She had forgotten what love without conditions felt like. Later, she approached Amara quietly. For once, there was no ice in her voice. "You remind me of myself when I was your age." Amara looked up in surprise. The older woman's eyes softened as they rested on the child. She reached out, hesitated, then finally touched the baby's tiny hand. "He's strong," she murmured. Then, meeting Amara's gaze, she whispered words Amara never thought she'd hear. "Welcome to the family." Tears welled in Amara's eyes. It wasn't complete approval, not yet, but it was the first fragile bridge across a chasm of doubt. And for the first time, she felt she truly belonged. The sun dipped low, painting the city skyline in molten gold. On the mansion's balcony, Amara stood with David, the baby cradled between them. The air was cool, the silence peaceful, a silence earned after storms of gossip, betrayal, and trials. Amara looked at her reflection in the glass doors. The woman staring back wasn't the beggar by the roadside anymore. She wasn't the girl shivering in shame or clutching her belly in fear. She was a wife, a mother, and, above all, someone who had survived. David slipped his arm around her shoulders. "Do you ever think about that night? When I saw you by the roadside?" Amara smiled faintly, her eyes misty. "Every day. I thought it was the end of my story. But it was just the beginning." He kissed her forehead. "You were never a beggar to me. You were always a queen waiting for her crown." Amara's heart swelled. She gazed at the city lights, at the world that once mocked her and now whispered her name with awe. She had been scorned, abandoned, and broken, but love had lifted her not into fairy tale perfection, but into a life where she was cherished. As the baby cooed softly in David's arms, Amara whispered, "From beggar to bride and beyond." The words hung in the air, not as a boast, but as a testimony. Her journey was proof that love could grow in the unlikeliest soil, that dignity could be restored, and that even the forgotten could find a home. And in the golden light of evening, their story stood complete, yet still unfolding, one heartbeat at a time. Loved the story? Don't just watch, like, subscribe, and be part of the AFROPULSE family. Your support keeps the tales alive. See you in the next one.